You know what? There are so many reasons to be excited and optimistic about our future. So many cracks of light in our world right now. People who are out there courageously blazing new trails and leading the way towards a world where people, planet, and profit collectively thrive. I want you to hear their ideas and let them inspire you to see this time we're in as a fascinating time of transformation. Welcome to the Cracks of Light podcast. I am your host, Laura Storm. Throughout this podcast series, we will co-create a leadership manifesto for a thriving world. Please feel free to join us by going to my website, www.laura-storm.com. And now to episode 4, Disruptive Design and Systems Thinking with Dr. Leyla Acaroglu. Leyla really is a modern-day superhero, and she blew my mind when I saw her TED Talk on rethinking sustainable design. She has a background in both social science and design, and is truly a design disruptor, creative boundary pusher and thinker. Through her online Unschool education modules, workshops, and keynotes, she teaches and challenges people to think differently about how the world works and how we can redesign for regeneration. She has developed what she calls the disruptive design method, and when she's not traveling the world, she's currently renovating a farm in Portugal. And what that is all about, we will explore in this episode. So get ready to deep dive into system thinking, disrupting status quo, new exciting business models, behavior change, modern day activism, and so much more. I promise you'll be inspired, motivated, and excited about the future. Let's start. Leyla, I believe you are a phenomenal thinker, designer, strategist, provocateur, and communicator. And you are out there challenging the status quo of how the world currently works. And thank you for that. I'm very curious to know whether there was a defining moment that led you down that path of challenging the current design thinking.
Yes, there definitely was. Early on in my career, I studied industrial design or product design because it seemed like a very fun job, right? Like I was young and I thought I really want to do a job that's going to mean that I can be creating things. But in the design program I was in, there was a class I went to one day and it was like engineering 101 or something. And the lecturer, he said, okay, everyone, we're going to open our textbooks to page 50 something and we're going to learn all about this thing called the Gaia theory, which is that everything in nature is interconnected. And so as a designer, you're going to make decisions that will probably have far-reaching impacts on the planet, and you probably won't know about it. And it was like someone had hit me in the head. I was like, what do you mean? So I felt very shocked. And first of all, I was shocked that I think I was 19 or 20 years old at the time. Nobody had told me that everything was interconnected, which made extreme sense the moment that I heard it. And then that I also now had basically accidentally fallen into a path of life that was going to mean that I, as a human who was genuinely interested in contributing to the world, might be accidentally making problems for the world. So this was really profound for me in that moment. And the lecturer, he also talked a little bit about environmental impacts and the kinds of things that we should be, that we're seeing right now and that we're concerned about right now. But at the time was still quite not very well discussed, in regards to big catastrophic environmental feedback loops. And so I turned to the rest of my class, and in those days, it was like 15 years ago, there was only 2 girls and the rest were guys. And I said, oh my God, guys, like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to not destroy the planet by making design things? And this one guy said, I'll never forget it because it was it was such a profound moment. It was a direct quote. He said, Leyla, I don't know why you're freaking out. It's not like any of these catastrophic environmental impacts will impact us in our lifetime. So why should we care?
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to make you care. like my life mission was bestowed upon me in that moment. Where I was like, you can't be responsible for constructing the world through material objects and visual communication and all of the stuff designers do without caring. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so that has been my one of my life missions since that day, is to help get people to understand that the choices we make as creative professionals have impacts on people and the planet. And those impacts can be amazing. They can change people's lives and make their lives extremely wonderful, and they can be catastrophic. And that catastrophic impact is often unintentional and often unbeknownst to the designer. And so then I kind of started a career path of exploring and learning all of the science and all of the knowledge that I could acquire around behavioral sciences, cognitive sciences, material sciences, environmental sciences, so that I could help to challenge the design industry to be more conscious and intentional of the impact that it has on the world around us.
Was it difficult to access the kind of knowledge that you were intuitively seeking?
No. What actually ended up happening was I ended up quitting design school in a bit of a provocative statement that I did, because I didn't want to create any. I realized I was learning how to create crap to sell to idiots. That's what it felt like, that I wasn't going to be contributing in a significant and valuable way when my design briefs were like design an internet connected object that made no sense to me, because I'm like, why should my refrigerator order my food for me? Like, why can't I order my food myself? And just because we have the capacity to make such technology doesn't mean that we have to have this type of technology. And that critical reflection and evaluation felt very intuitive to me, but I wasn't being given the tools at design school to reflect in that way. And that was my design program, but also at the time as well, globally, design, there was only 1 or 2 programs in the world where sustainability was part of the design program. So I ended up leaving design school and studying social science, majoring in sustainability, because I had this yearning quest to understand how humans worked and how the planet worked. And whilst doing that program, I ended up volunteering. I just went and knocked on the door of this research center at my university that was actually one of the world's leading research centers into sustainable design, at RMIT in Melbourne. And I got mentored in the end for over a decade by one of the world's best life cycle assessment practitioners. So I learned all about stuff. So, I mean, I've always been a very proactive person. Like, if I want to find something out, if I've got a knowledge gap, I go and try and fill it. And obviously the internet has a wealth of knowledge, but unless you have the tools to understand how to extract information from people, from books, from experiences, then, knowledge can often fall on deaf ears. So I definitely feel like over the years, I've really developed a practice of experiential knowledge acquisition. Like, I believe that it's all experiences that give us the main knowledge. So obviously I can read stuff and I can process read information, but more so the active experience of participating in something is going to be far more educative and profound. So I often seek out experiences that will give me the new knowledge that I need to help fill a gap or build a new idea. And that's very much a design thing to do, right? Like, designers love to experience things. That's how we learn. So in the end, like, combining my different areas of interest and just natural curiosity really helped me build a transdisciplinary practice. In the end, I did a PhD in industrial design, so I went full circle. And after doing sociology, and actually, the cool thing is that when I discovered sociology, it was like all of my nerdiness came out, right? Like, I was so into it. I didn't realize I would be so into it. But sociology for me is like, oh my gosh, it's like the secret magic of how the world works, like human behavior and economics. And so I actually did extremely well at school there because I was so into it, and it was amazing. And then I did quite a strong academic period
training.
of my life. Yeah, and I'm grateful for it. But I also, in the experience of going through to the highest level of academic achievement, getting a PhD, I realized how incredibly screwed up academia is, because you have to contort yourself to this system that is a hierarchical, structured system that doesn't necessarily give you the freedom of contributing knowledge in diverse ways. You have to contribute it within the structure. And whilst on one hand, that's extremely important because we have consistency, transparency, and replicability. But when you look at it from a more complex systems perspective, you're often squishing out potential creative ideas because of the rigidness of the structure. And the siloed nature of academia has always driven me crazy, that you do one degree and you become one thing, and that's your life then, which is not how the world works, right? Most of us will have 4 or 5 professions. We'll start somewhere, we get the foundations through school and through academic inquiry, but then we go on these crazy life journeys where we learn new things. Like I've self-taught a large percentage of my knowledge on cognitive sciences. And, I've interviewed lots of different extreme professionals in that space, but I have enough of a foundational knowledge set to be able to see the relationship between cognitive biases and the way in which the brain works and how we can use that to help perhaps build new initiatives to solve problems. And so I think that forging one's own path from a good foundation is really important. But that whole experience led me to start the Unschool of Disruptive Design, which is an experimental knowledge lab, where essentially I wanted to solve the problem that I experienced in academia, which was constantly feeling extremely repressed creatively, and also being very frustrated by the type of pedagogy, knowledge transfer that academia has. And I got very into critical pedagogy and the idea of the educator being a guide through knowledge, not being the dictator of knowledge. And so the Unschool is really based on this concept that we're all in a learning experience together. And whilst if I'm the facilitator of that learning experience, my job is to design a space or a scaffolding for other people to gain access to their own knowledge and new knowledge in a very effective and rapid way. And so that's really what we've been experimenting with and what we've had a lot of successes in developing new curriculum and approaches to knowledge transfer and experience.
And I absolutely love the different courses that you offer through Unschool, and I will very much encourage all listeners to go check that out. But do you think that there's starting to be more acceptance in the old school educational environment for some of the methods that you're teaching, and just exactly as you started mentioning the fact that everything is interconnected and systems thinking? Is that starting to be integrated in design schools, or what is your experience?
Look, there's no homogenous shift. There is definitely some schools that are more proactive. They have some of our, living legends in the sustainable design space. And MIT, for example, Jay Foster was one of the leading thinkers of systems approaches. And systems thinking is embedded from organizational management through to cybernetics, right? It's essentially understanding complexity and working within a system rather than against it. And the way I apply systems thinking is in a very analog way of understanding how one has the agency to intervene in a system to make change. And so when you apply it through a design perspective, essentially designers create new narratives or products that influence the world. And if you use a systems thinking lens in order to create the foundations for that designed intervention, you can maximize the likelihood of having an effective impact because you've understood the dynamics and the way in which that intervention will exist within the world. But a lot of things that are created are not created with the concept of their unintended consequences or the feedback loops. They're produced because they're trying to fulfill a very immediate superficial need. So for me, the academic arena is shifting always. We've been very fortunate. The Unschool's curriculum, I developed this thing called the Disruptive Design Method, which is a 3-part process of mining, landscaping, and building that just helps people think through a process of understanding the world, looking at the systems, and then building interventions in a way that gives them validity. But then we have this 12-unit methodology that I created over years of working in this space. And that is how do I say? There's a lot of schools who are very excited about it. But then I'm also a little bit anti-establishment. So I get always a little bit well, until you guys really change, I don't know if I want to work with you. But I think that, companies and corporations who are also in this transition of change phase, It's very hard. The structure that we've created for academic institutes and for corporations is ultimately the incentive, the perverse incentive that the agents who have power within those systems to maintain the status quo, right? So if your entire economic feasibility and professional capacity as a human is based on you maintaining a system that you don't even agree with, but if you don't have that system, like if you're not producing X number of papers and replicating the same structure and having the same number of PhD students, then your wage and your position and all of those things are jeopardized, then why would you be motivated to challenge the status quo? And the same applies with the CEOs or the mid-level managers of corporations. You know, ultimately their professional success and their economic validity is based on them meeting the status quo expectations of their shareholders. So when you have a company trying to transition into sustainability or the circular economy and they're stuck in this well, I have to pioneer change, and then I have to also not only make my organization be willing to change, but the people who essentially fund our organization be willing to change with us. That's really very difficult. You have to have a true leader who's able to do that. And unfortunately, because of the education system that we do all go through, we learn reductionism rather than the opposing theory of holism or interconnected systems thinking. And so a lot of people don't know how to work in these dynamic environments in a way that's going to maximize the positive outcome. So for me, there's still a long way to go with the way we teach. Certainly, education should be about lessons for living a life, not for being controlled by a system, which is what normal pedagogy has always been structured on. Bells are in schools to Pavlovian condition humans to go to the toilet and eat at certain times. That was introduced in order to help people be ready for the factory lines. Well, now we no longer really have factory lines. We don't even have people working in low-level jobs because machines have taken over it. So I think there's huge ethical conversations and debates about the type of work we have that we're offering people, the type of education. It doesn't relate, right? The connection between what we teach in schools from a young age through to academia and what people are actually experiencing in the world. These are huge disconnects. And so, for me, a lot of the people who come to the unschool, because it's for adults, they've gone through their entire academic career. They've gotten the job. Most of them are extremely successful humans, but they wake up one morning and they're like, hang on a second, deep down inside me, I have this sense of purpose and belonging that I should do something more meaningful with my life. And now I'm stuck in this system that I didn't realize, I have the money and I'm not poor and I've done everything that the world wanted me to do, but I'm not happy. And that's really a sad state of affair where we don't have businesses being able to accommodate the needs of their people, and that we're still stuck in an industrial mindset when it comes to education and it comes to the relationship between work and purpose, production and society at large.
What do you think our generation, because you and I are both millennials, what can our generation do best right now to help change this paradigm and move into one where we have a better understanding of, for example, in the design community, that everything is interconnected, but really that's something that counts for all sectors, right? We need to understand that everything is interconnected, and we need to understand the mark that our products and services, etc., are actually leaving in the world. I'm curious to know what you think, because I'm an impatient person. How do we get this process and train moving as fast as possible or as quickly as possible instead of continuing wasting time in this old paradigm?
Yeah, well, I'm extremely impatient as well, but I need to remind myself regularly that change is constant. It's always happening around us. We're in a constant universal flux. And to be honest, we live in one of the most amazing, safest, incredible times in human history. However, we've also created systems and feedback loops where we only see the shit thanks to, social media and the fact that at the end of the day, humans have a negativity bias and it sells more eyeballs to ads if we all click on the same stuff. And so we have this perception, and there certainly is a lot of ills and problems in the world, and I'm not denying that, but we also need to remember that each human has the agency to affect a positive change in the world, and that we don't need to believe what is perceived to be the status quo, which is that everything's screwed up and that with runaway climate change is going to kill us all, which is a lot of millennials believe that according to recent studies. I think you have to realize the future is not defined, that we define it based on the actions we take today and every minute of our lives. And a lot of people have been what I call de-agentized, which is completely a made-up word. But essentially, we have lost our agency to participate in the world in any more significant and meaningful ways. And if I take myself as an example, I was given no special powers. I was given no extra resources. In fact, I had a lot of things stacked against me, yet through my passion and my curiosity and my desire to participate in the world and to find my own sense of meaning, I've really been able to take the limited resources and turn them into really significant tools of change. And I wouldn't have ever imagined that 15 years ago when I was sitting in that design room. It just so happened to be that I didn't ever lose my curiosity. And that's really one of the key things I would say that to respond to your question is, you have to remember that life is a magical wonderland. It is absolutely phenomenal that life exists on this planet. Physicists have never found anything anywhere else in the cosmos that's even remotely as magical as this planet. And so we need to remember that whatever you think life is happening to you, and yes, we all suffer and we all have problems and there's much trauma in this world. I'm not discounting that. But that we all have the agency to rescript the way we engage with the world and to script the type of future that we want to live in through the actions we take today. So for me, it's extremely important that we remember that our own agency, that we have curiosity, and that we take on a sense of purpose for something that's going to have a bigger value to ourselves, because we are right now consumers. We consume everything, and humans have just extracted and used resources in such a selfish way. And this, in my mind, is where we need to shift to producers. We need to be producers of value. We are all interconnected with the planet. We cannot deny that. You have to breathe, you have to eat, you have to drink water. Those things are free resources provided by this earth to us. If we move to Mars, we would have to take all of those things with us. But yet, as a species, what we've done is we just keep extracting and keep polluting and keep just like being extremely selfish teenagers, essentially. So what I'm interested in is how we can quickly grow up and become regenerators. How do we regenerate rather than just degenerate the natural systems that we are a part of? And this, to me, is like the ultimate design challenge. And it's not like just a challenge that people who work in material forms can take on. It's those of us who are also working in whatever job you have, right? Like it's a mindset shift away from like, well, I am entitled to extracting these resources. I'm entitled to this, to being like, yeah, sure. My life is more valuable to the world when I'm part of a community that I contribute and that I find ways of being at the forefront of doing things that give back to the world, rather than just take. It's a more dynamic, reciprocal relationship then. And I think that humanity can get to that point. We just need to invest more of our creative capacity and more of our intellectual energy and more of our finances in the right kind of research, development, experimentation, and production. But right now, a lot of our energy and resources goes into producing stuff we don't need, more apps that don't solve problems, and that just deflects responsibility away from the people who could potentially be not only obtaining economic benefit through the development of new businesses, new services, new products, but also the personal benefit of having done something that gives them rewards and significance.
I absolutely agree, very much so. I'm curious to know whether you could unfold your disruptive design method a bit more, because there are many designers and architects and product makers listening to this podcast, and where can they start if they feel that they are inspired by your words? What is a good first step, and how can they use your disruptive design method?
Sure. Well, the disruptive design method is essentially like a thinking and doing process, right? So it's entirely designed to give people a very clear tool, and each term is designed to make it really clear as to what you're doing. So there's 3 phases: mining, landscaping, and building. I love construction metaphors. Everyone knows the world is built. So I in the mining phase, it's really an exploration of the way in which a phenomena exists, whether that be a problem arena or whether that be you're trying to redesign the way in which people make coffee, right? Whatever you're trying to understand. And in that phase, in this mining phase, you suspend the need to solve. It's so important, because literally I've taught tens of thousands of hours of courses, classes, workshops in innovation, in creative problem solving, in thinking about things. And what happens is that a lot of people can't help but try to solve a problem immediately. We all do it. It's a human nature. And that's great. Solving a problem is fantastic. However, if you try to solve it without having adequate information, without understanding it, you often solve it in the lowest common denominator. And our brains have this habit of seeking dopamine or serotonin, the neurological reward drugs. And so once we think we've solved it, it gets the reward, and then it literally stops the floodgate of thinking. So for me, it's super important that in the mining phase, you don't stop. Like, if you have an idea, fine. But I was like, idea board it. I'm like, clear it out. It's there, but I'm not solving this problem right now. I'm seeking to understand it. I want to get totally intimate with it. It's like you take your problem on a date, learn about it, ask it all the questions. Don't be sitting there trying to tell it what it should be, which is what a lot of people start a project with. It's like, what should this be? So in this mining phase, it's really about digging out like an archaeological dig of whatever it is you're trying to understand. And you pull out all these pieces then. And those pieces then become the nodes or the key elements that fit into a systems map, which is the landscaping phase. In the landscaping phase, what we're seeking to do is to start to put the puzzle pieces together to get an understanding of the complexity, the flows, the feedbacks, the relationships, and the connections that are not obvious to the human eye when they first encounter a problem. So most people often only see in systems thinking what's called the tip of the iceberg, the most obvious part of the system. But in all creative interventions that are successful in leveraging change, it's the unobvious components of the system, often the connections and the relationships, that are the locations where the most influence can affect the most the least impact, or least energy can affect the most influence. So we're trying to seek them out in the landscaping phase. And it's literally like bird's eye view. Like when you're in an airplane and you can see the lay of the land, it's exactly the same. You're getting this bigger picture perspective of the relationships. And then from that, you have this extremely strong foundation to build solutions. You're like essentially taking the insights and these new areas that you've uncovered, and you're building interventions through creative production, whatever that is, whether that be a new product, a new service, a new concept. It doesn't matter. Essentially, it's the building phase is really the creative production phase. And these three phases, the mining, landscaping, and building, are iterated through using what is known as the action research cycle, which has been long proven to be an extremely effective way of producing iterative, evolving, emergent things in the world. And that essentially says that you cycle through the act of understanding a problem, putting the pieces together, and then building solutions until you get to a point where you've created something that is the perfect fit for the complex problem that you're trying to intervene in. And when I use words to describe this, it's not as powerful as when you look at the visuals we've created, and some of the examples that we've done are just often it's the simplest intervention that can have the most powerful influence. So I would say to any designer or creative person out there who's interested in this, like, you don't have to engage with the disruptive design method by any means, but I would strongly suggest that you learn about systems thinking, and that you also find ways of developing a practice of creative intervention that seeks to understand the potential, both positive and negative, of what you produce in the world. So this is really contingency planning for the law of unintended consequences. Because the one thing we've learned over and over and over again is that good intentions don't necessarily result in good outcomes, and that some of our best intentions have actually created bigger problems. And that is extremely important humbling to come to terms with. And so really the reason I developed this method was to give people the tools to preemptively consider the impacts of their choices, whether it be as simple as a material choice through to the complexity of a government intervention or, a new organizational structure. And so it's really important that we have this kind of big picture perspective. I call it the ability to think in the telescope, to be able to look at the infinite possibility of the universe, and then the microscope, to be able to look at the absolute infinite, beautiful relationship between atoms. To think between these two dimensions, these two worlds, creates a three-dimensional perspective of how the world works and creates a much more robust creative practice. So, in my mind, totally, you can read all the stuff. We've written books. We've got a lot of stuff online that helps people. But at the end of the day, the tools that you need in order to make effective and positive change through your creative practice is to understand complexity, to embrace curiosity, and to be willing to iterate through what you're creating, so that when you end up with something in the world that you've produced, that it it's not just speaking the narrative of the function, it's speaking the narrative of something bigger, you know. And there's a lot of products and services now that are starting to really embrace this like social influential role that they have.
Can you give us a good example of a product or a company that you know of that have used these methods?
Tools of similar nature, sure. I mean, there's a bunch of classic examples, one of which I like is the interface flooring, which is essentially where you go from like a very mundane and boring product, which is carpet, which has a very core functionality of keeping it warm and looking good. When the problem with carpet is you have one problem, you have a stain or one area gets worn out and you have to replace the whole thing. And so this company essentially took on the challenge of designing a more sustainable product, and they ended up, you know, doing carpet tiles, but then they evolved that to like reducing the glue, and they just essentially took on this product design challenge through the lens of not just delivering functionality to the consumer and a product to the consumer, but a service and a system. And from a sustainability perspective, long argued and adopted into the circular economy is this idea of a product service system model. However, at the same time, you can always end up with unintentional negative impacts. So the cell phone industry, essentially, since we've had smartphones, has essentially become a PSS model, product service system model, but on the negative side. So you are locked out of your product by the intentional design with all of the hex screws and the way things are glued together. If you're into this kind of stuff, you should totally look at ifixit.com. Really cool. They do teardowns on every new electronic item, and they rate their repairability based on the way that it's constructed. And they actually produce repair manuals, which none of the producers of your favorite cell phones or computers actually do voluntarily, because they're motivated by the economic benefit of having you locked in a system of continually buying a new product. So that's what I'm saying. It's actually become a PSS model that's in the negative realm, because we never own our products anymore. We only own the service of using them until the producer decides, for example, that they're going to no longer support the firmware, so you can't update it. And we're seeing this now not just in cell phones and computers, but also in cars and many other. That's why I personally am like pretty opposing to the Internet of Things. I think it's completely stupid to just waste our resources on making our lives even more redundant. Humans need to work, right? Like neurologically, we get value from participating in the world. So I think taking away all of our contributions is a really dangerous direction to go down, because I know personally, and I'm sure many listeners, if you think about the things that bring you the most joy, it's often interconnection with other humans that you like, so your loved ones, and your friends and your family, and whatever form of interconnection, whether that be like hanging out, having a beer, or whether that be having a really intimate moment, that brings us joy, and also success, right? Like we get reward from success. Our brains are neurologically rewired to pump out all of our neurochemicals of success once we've taken on a challenge and we've done we've gone through the motions of getting there. Now, if the challenge is greater, the reward is greater, you know. And so what happens is when we take away a lot of this reward system, we become like quite we don't have like, where's the value anymore? And we lose a lot of our sense of purpose, because and I mean that can be as crazy as that can be as crazy as people having a sense of fulfillment when they volunteer their time to mentor someone, right? Because they were the beneficiaries of mentorship. In fact, a research project that I did to develop a toolkit for busting through gender biases demonstrated that most people pay forward organic mentorship, meaning if somebody took you under their wing at some point in your professional development, informally, and they gave you support and advice, you are more than likely going to just organically do the same thing for other people once you get to a position of success, because it's human nature to pay forward things that benefited us. That's why we have children and we don't screw them up. We are motivated to protect the next generation for our own benefit. So I think for me, like, you know, companies that are willing to take on the challenge of pioneering change, and they're willing to accept the fact that the old industrial age is no longer as necessary. We need to find ways of producing our energy and our products and our services and our needs and our desires in much more harmonious ways with nature. And they're willing to go through the hard slog of getting the information that leads to those incredible innovations, they're the ones who are going to get the rewards in the long run. And I think the companies that we have had a lot of success at the moment in a plundering kind of way will be disrupted by the companies that come above them with the technology and with the foresight to understand that the future is regenerative, sustainable, and circular. It has to be. It has to be for the survival of our species, and it has to be for the survival of the planet. So to me, it's like, I mean, if you're not at the forefront, that's fine. If you don't want to be a leader, if you don't want to be a pioneer, that's fine. You can hang around waiting for somebody else to tell you what to do. But if you are an organization that prides itself on being an innovator, of being productive, and then if you are not at the absolute forefront of pioneering sustainable change and circularity within your industry, and meeting the needs of your employees in a more harmonious way with purpose and fulfilling opportunities, then you are for sure going to be disrupted in a way that you're not going to like for sure. It might not be tomorrow, it might not be next year, but for sure, you are designing your own obsolescence.
Mm. Completely agree. And I think slowly that is something that really starts to resonate with many C-level executives, thankfully. They may not know how to navigate or what to do exactly with that information and that knowing, but slowly things are changing. And I completely agree that what we need to focus on is the positive and exciting examples. That's also why I wanted to bring the cracks of light and people like you into the greater spotlight. I would like to know what excites you the most at the moment. What has driven you? I know that you are right now speaking to us from a farm in Portugal. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, actually, it connects well with the last statement that you just made about successful people, so people who have climbed the ladder and they've learned a lot and they've been able to put their skills to good use, and they're working in companies or as entrepreneurs, and they do have this deeper sense of like contribution. But and I have the same problem, which is that especially when we become experts and we become highly capable, we don't like to acknowledge that we don't know how to do certain things. And certainly sustainability is extremely complicated. Nature is complicated. I always say, you shouldn't expect to be able to build a bridge without an engineer. So don't try and change the world without the right help. And so actually in light of that, I had to acknowledge that I had a massive personal knowledge gap, which is that I teach systems change and sustainability and innovation, and I'm very good at knowing how the industrial systems work, and I know very much how social systems work, but actually I have no idea how nature works. And I was profoundly aware of my ignorance on several occasions in the best way, when you're like curiously going, oh, how does that work? And then you're like, how do I not know how this works? And it was actually to do with growing a tomato plant and not knowing that, of course, now I say it and it sounds so stupid, but not knowing that, of course, the plants have to be pollinated. Like, of course, the tomatoes don't just grow. Just because you have a tomato plant doesn't mean that tomatoes are going to grow. Like, either you have to pollinate them or a bee has to pollinate them, and then you get tomatoes. But that's simple piece of information completely lacking from my knowledge bank, because I'd never experienced it before, and I've never hung out at a tomato farm before. And so this very acute, also the same was with coconuts and how coconuts grow. Long story, I happened to be on a beach, and I was like, that's going to turn into a coconut tree? And someone was like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, I know I sound stupid right now, but don't make me feel stupid for my ignorance. I can't know how everything in nature works. And it was actually that where I was like, holy shit, I need to learn how nature works. And I'm a big fan of Buckminster Fuller. And he's, I always say that, I stand on the shoulders of great giants, and he's one of the shoulders I stand on. And I hope to be a link in the chain for other people in the future, in this sense, the thinkers and the doers who challenge the status quo. But he started developing, the concept of natural principles in design, which has been evolved by other practitioners. But I genuinely started to question how I would be able to help companies, organizations, and governments who I work with at the moment to truly create regenerative and circular, sustainable product systems and services without understanding the basic principles of nature. And to my own philosophy, I have to participate to know. So I bought a farm in Portugal. Why Portugal? Because I love it. They have the best of everything: food, coffee, nature, people. It's great. It's a very beautiful country. So I have a farm it's an olive farm actually, but it's a project. I'm building I'm building a cultural destination for creative change makers, because there are many like places in this world that I can go that fulfill me creatively. Like there's beautiful art galleries and stuff, but I don't know anywhere I can go where I know that I'm going to connect with other people who have the same sense of purpose and commitment to solving the world's problems through creativity and to helping collaborate with other people who have the same creative passion. And so that's kind of what I'm building. I brought an old olive mill. I laugh as I say it, because it's a crazy project that actually, even when I say it out loud, I'm still like, what are you doing, Will? Like I have to travel the world, like speaking at the UN and doing all these things, and then I'm like farming. But it's incredible, the juxtaposition and the learning and the, like, I don't know if I can swear on this. You have to bleep it. I already said a few times, but I actually wanted to call it the up farm in the beginning, because the amount of times that I screwed up doing things here in the first few months. I mean, I've only been here a few months, but like learning how to do things. I'm working with a lot of local contractors, because we have 2 farmhouses and an old olive mill that we're converting into a boutique brain spa concept where you can come and stay. You can hire it for your offsite corporate retreats. We'll also be curating programming with creatives around summertime, and so it's a destination. You'll be able to come, you'll be able to stay, you'll be able to learn. We'll partner with other universities where we will help deliver some more of this experience-based pedagogy around natural systems and design solutions. And it's a home for the unschool, like I said, my school. But essentially, it's a pretty crazy project. It's quite big. So we are going to run a Kickstarter. Your support is always welcome. But I really do hope to create a collaborative space. I called it CO, which stands for many C and O words. And for me, CO stands for creative optimism, because I truly believe that creativity brings us hope, and that in this current narrative of dystopian futures, the one thing we need to be reminded of is that we built the world. The world builds us, and we can rebuild it in a way that helps make it more equitable and ethical and constructive. Because at the end of the day, we all love the little people, whether we have our own little people or other people's little people, but we do a lot of what we do for the little people. And those little people are going to inherit a legacy of our inaction unless we start to work together to really reimagine the future. So, that's what I'm excited about it. I'm super excited about failing well. I really like it when I screw up, because once I get over the sting, because there's always a sting, right? Like, especially if you're a high achiever, it's like, what can I learn from this? And again, that's where that mining mindset comes in, where you're like, hey, I'm just going to mine this experience. What just happened? Like, how is it that I managed to just completely and utterly destroy this part of my vegetable garden? What did I do wrong? And, it's like it's a beautiful feedback loop of knowledge. So that's where that curiosity mindset really comes in too, And so this project hopefully will be a really awesome longitudinal project that gives people like you and I, and I'm sure many listeners, a space, a destination, and a way to contribute as well, because Portugal has actually gone through a lot of economic problems, and these rural areas are abandoned. My property that I have here was actually abandoned for 15 years. So we're doing a lot of soil regeneration and trying to reintroduce the right microorganisms and things to make it much abundant again. But it's really made me start to philosophically question who's going to be responsible for the soil, the land, and the food production when this generation of farmers dies. Because our generation has become extremely disconnected from any form of food production. And I don't know about you, but I certainly don't want to give up my food systems to mass producing monocultures, because they destroy nature, but also they destroy the nutrients of the food. And so I am extremely interested in who's going to be the farmers. So I'm like kind of interested in cool farming, and also this idea of mixed use business models and how we can also regenerate the soils, and we can use these lands. Like in the area that I'm in, there's the oldest olive tree, one of the oldest olive trees in the world here. It's 2,000 years old. It still produces olives. Olives are like magic, by the way. It's very interesting. I've been learning a lot about olives and the amount of things one can do with olive oil. But I think that it's a very interesting question, and the model that I'm trying to build here is actually a model. It's an experiment for this concept of like rural renewal. So, and regeneration, and our generation taking it on and being able to learn from the dying elders that have got so much knowledge about how to produce and how to work within nature systems, and then bring that into a more contemporary, social innovation. How can we create business models around this and have more small scale food production? Yeah, this is something I'm very interested in, but I didn't know I was interested in it until I became the custodian of a beautiful 200-year-old farm.
What made you take the plunge and just think, okay, I'm from Australia, I moved to New York, and now I'm going to buy a farm in Portugal?
Well, there was a few factors. One was that I travel constantly and it's extremely exhausting. And I think, hearing your story as well, I get stressed, right? Like I get super stressed out. Like I feel like responsible for leading change, and I put that stress on myself, and I get really stressed out, and New York was stressing me out. Like it was super, like I was having anxiety attacks, not because I wasn't extremely successful. That was the problem. I was like, oh my God, I'm becoming really successful and I don't know how to cope with this. I don't know how to stop. Like I don't know how to stop, and no one's given me the skills through life experiences on how to just like pace it out a little bit. And so I wanted to disrupt my own life. I work in disruption. I was like, well, you're responsible for this, Leyla. Like, how are you going to change the conditions that you're operating within? And so a complete juxtaposition was necessary. But also because I like multifunctionality, I like things that serve many purposes. I also wanted a place for my school to be able to run programs. And I also wanted a place that wasn't just like for me, because that's also not that interesting. I'm very into collaboration and I'm very into collective creativity, like artists, designers, scientists, all forms of producers in the world working together. And I've been really inspired by the Bauhaus. And also there's a place in Australia called the Museum of Old and New Art, which is basically like the coolest museum on the planet, founded by a guy who made all his money counting cards and playing poker, and now he's banned from every single casino in the world. But he made a lot of money and collected a lot of amazing art, and then built an art gallery on an island in a vineyard in the middle of an island in Tasmania. So and this place is incredible. And, the kind of fulfillingness that I get going to a space like that is something that I wanted to create for other people too. And being a creative and a designer, I love projects. So there was all these things that kind of happened. And yes, I did kind of wake up one morning and was like, I'm going to buy a farm in Portugal. It was like that because I'm a little bit nuts like that. But I also have projects. I'm sure that many creatives know this. Like you have the Gestalt moment. Like you have all these things playing around in your mind, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. And then you're doing something completely benign, like having a shower or riding a bike or cooking dinner. And you're like, oh my God, my brain. And your brain just puts all, and it's like fireworks go off, right? And that happens to me with the unschool. I still have the piece of paper I randomly, in the middle of getting dressed after a shower, I wrote this unschool of disruptive design and then built it. Now we have 350 alumni in 39 countries. We've run programs on 5 continents. It's crazy. So I feel like this concept, whilst it's a grand vision, and I do have some days where it stresses me out, I feel extremely grateful because I think the cool thing about having crazy ideas is it attracts energy from other people. And my contractor and my local, I literally hired half a town of expert stonemasons and all of the people, this knowledge. It's incredible. I'm a sustainable designer. I can get commissioned to come and tell you how to design something sustainably. And I'm doing this project. And all of a sudden I'm learning things that are so counterintuitive to what I've learned. For example, natural materials here are a massive problem because they have woodworms. So if you want to have longitudinal materials, you either have to treat them with chemicals to prevent the woodworms, which are just natural here, or you have to use a higher embodied energy product, so a steel or a concrete, if you want to have longitudinal impact. So it's so counterintuitive to me, but of course it makes complete sense because there's an environmental there's something natural that you need to work with. Now, if you use hardwoods, then you can get around that. But a lot of the hardwood production in Portugal was taken over by eucalypt production in order for the paper industry. So it's like working with the materials, the knowledge. It's like so amazing for me because I'm a creative who likes to solve problems, and here I am with an old 200-year-old olive mill that's roof fell in because of the fact that it had woodworms because of the wood structure in the roof. And now I have to design, a solution that's going to, be fire resistant and earthquake resistant. And it's cool. And I'm working with this amazing local contractor who's an architect. And it's like the magic experience that you didn't know you were going to have, and then you're having. So yeah, it's great. And I mean, we've already had a lot of visitors. I mean, thankfully, having the School, we have a lot of cool people from around the world. But I'm really excited to start running some small, what I'm calling rustic programs, because we won't have the mill ready to house people, but some smaller programs starting next year. And to really invite creatives who want to do residencies here and to really enjoy. It's extremely beautiful. We're 5 minutes from one of the biggest freshwater lakes in Portugal called the Zezera. You can go swimming. You could go wakeboarding if you wanted to. And just really there's art studios here on the property, offer people the opportunity to come and take that R&R, that rest and regeneration, but also that production, with 5G internet. And I personally can't just stop. That's what I've learned. It's like, but I need to know how to rev the engine at the right way so that I don't destroy the machinery that keeps,
Yeah, and it can completely break down. And you mentioned yourself that you are a high achiever, and I'm certainly like that myself. I mean, when passion takes over, I'm just in a constant high drive. I mean, it's difficult for me to stop. And as you know, I had a sudden stop to my life over a little over 2 years ago, and I think the listeners know about that. But what that has made me drawn to is very much, okay, how can we slow collectively down a bit? Because those gestalt moments, as you talk about, those moments where inspiration, creativity hits you, that's almost never when you sit in front of your computer stressing out about some deadline. It's when you take that space to kind of connect to nature and connect to yourself and just be like moving forward in life at another pace. So I'm very much trying to kind of spread that message that I've always been focused on building sustainable societies, but that will never happen unless we also live sustainable lives. So I'm curious to know, what do you do now to continuously remind yourself to slow down a bit?
I water the garden. I mean, the cool thing about having a farm is it's constantly calling me, like, look after me. Like all the orange trees, we have 35 orange trees. They all need to be mulched down. Like I call it bird nesting. It's extremely funny. Like you put like mulch down the bottom, you make like a little bird nest for so the moisture stays in there. I mean, there's constant work to do on a farm, but it's like I when I'm here, I split my time between production with what I have to do. I run 2 businesses. I travel the world. But then I also have all of this time. Like, I don't know where my cell phone is when I come to the farm. Like, I'm always losing it because I don't pick it up or touch it like I do when I'm in the city. I'm, like, obsessed with it in the city. Like, oh, my God, is there a new email? Here, I'm like, they can call me later. So it's immediate. Like, you immediately transition into a different headspace. I take time to sit in. I get up early here and sit and watch the birds. It sounds so cliche, but it's adorable because the birds come and they eat all the bugs in the vegetable garden in the morning when it's quite early. And it's like, it's so cute because I go in the vegetable garden in the afternoon and there's all these bugs. And rather than having to come and control them, because we've got this beautiful ecosystem, the birds come and like eat all the bugs. And then the next morning there's more bugs and the birds come back. So like just being in a space that allows me the luxury of experiencing the world, and it's so quiet here. Like it's so quiet, it's amazing that it just brings, it's regenerative and it gives you space and energy like actively opening my mind to learn from the things that are around me. Like when I'm watering the garden, I am constantly reflecting on the world at large through this experience, like the way certain plants grow. Their entire form is designed to funnel water just to their roots. And I had never seen this before, but if you water a cabbage, for example, or a broccoli or any of these coniferous plants, no matter how they've grown, the entire design of their leaf is to perfectly funnel water directly to the root structure. It's amazing. So I could literally stand there watering a cabbage for 10 minutes just thinking about design principles in an extremely weird meditative way, but I'm not sitting there trying to meditate. It's just the experience, because I'm actively trying to absorb the experience, is very rewarding and regenerating and nourishing, actually.
Well, I'm one big smile. I'm so happy for you and for the world, because that means that you are able to continue to deliver huge value. So I'm so happy you found that farm and took that decision. That's amazing.
I'm excited to be able to share it with other people too, because I
can't wait to go. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Everyone's welcome.
So the final question is one that I ask all guests on the Cracks of Light podcast, because we are also co-creating a leadership manifesto for a thriving world. A world where people, planet, and profit can collectively thrive. And I'm asking all guests, what kind of elements would you want to have in such a manifesto if we are to see it as a sort of instruction manual for the next generation of leaders? What would be your two elements you would very much fight to have in there?
I'm thinking. That's why there's silence. Well, I think many of the C words, like curiosity and collaboration and connectedness, when I say that, I mean more about like understanding the connections of things, not like being connected to the internet, although the internet is really quite useful. I think that, we have systematically lost our curiosity with the world. So if I had to prioritize one, I would definitely prioritize curiosity. And I don't mean that in like the joyous wonderment of a kid discovering a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, which is magic, basically. But in the curiosity that you get from experiencing the world from a kind of more wonderment perspective, not the negative side, which we are often funneled into, because it's regenerative, right? Like, so there's so much research that's being done within the neuroscience at the moment that demonstrates the relationship between our brain and our body and our what's called the second gut, which is our microbiome, our digestive system. 95% of our serotonin, which is our neurochemical of reward, is produced in our gut. 50% of our dopamine is produced in our gut. And there's recent research is saying that essentially the microflora of our digestive system will force us to do certain things or eat certain things in order to benefit themselves, which is just mind-blowing if you think about it. So I think that old adage, you are what you eat, is possibly more true than we knew. But I think what this is showing us is that, physicists are also saying that, reality is constructed based on our perception of reality, which is mind-blowing unto itself, but also a reality that I think many of us realize, that the way in which you perceive the world, and from a systems thinking, we talk about mindsets or paradigms or concepts. The way we perceive the world ultimately dictates our experience of it. Love and sadness trigger same biophysical reactions, but it's the filter that we put on the experience that gives us that sense of joy and belonging or loss and pain. So, I'm a strong believer in curiosity and the courage that comes from being curious in the world. And so I would say this is a very important part of any practice. And it's something we must always remember to embrace. And especially when things are bad. If any time, I'm a big fan of Peter Singer, the ethicist, and he says that the best time that we should be altruistic is the time when we need altruism the most, right? Like if you have $100 left to your name, that's the time you should give away money, because that it A, breeds a hope in humanity, B, it also creates that feedback loop, but C, it reminds you of like that experience, the pain of not having a resource reminds you of your potential and your capacity. So I think, curiosity definitely. And then, I hate to sound like a broken record on the systems thing, but everybody needs to understand that everything's interconnected. And I don't mean that in a kind of like hippie way. I mean biophysical mechanics way. Like I'm breathing every, 30 seconds as I push words out of my mouth. And if I wasn't breathing, if I didn't have trees and photoplankton, I would not be able to do this magic, which is, make sounds reverberating my vocal cords to share knowledge with you or to share an experience with you. And so for me, it's like, we're all in a dynamic, interconnected, interdependent relationship with the things that are around us that have evolved and emerged based on necessity and function and changes to the environment. And so we are part of that emergent system. And so when we're looking at designing things or understanding the world, once you understand that everything's interconnected, there's all of these beautiful learnings that come to be. Like there is no blame. Like if everything's interconnected, there technically is no blame because something is always causing something else. So we move away from this blaming mindset to an inquiry mindset. And so then problems become opportunities. I always say in the Unschool when I'm teaching, every problem holds its own solution. You have to be the inquirer of the problem to learn what secrets it holds of its own solution. And then the same is to be said of things like, the easy way out often leads back in, or yesterday's solutions are today's problems. These are all just really simple reminders of how the connectedness of the biophysical interconnections of nature, of the life support systems that sustain us, the interconnected nature of the human experience. We are all social animals. We've learned social conditioning. We all have shared social biases, through to the interconnectedness of our shared experience as a species evolving on this planet, So I think that it's extremely important that we acknowledge and we design for interconnectedness. Yeah.
Beautiful.
They're my two. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Anything you want to share or say to the change makers listening out there before we wrap up?
I don't know. Use your words wisely and use them well, because not for every one of me. I always think this, Actually, one other profound experience was I pen palled with a refugee who was the same age as me right when I started design school. And I realized that she had the same life aspirations as me, but unfortunately life had given her not the same resources. And one of the key resources that I had was a voice and the freedom to use that voice. And I am only the beneficiary of that freedom because other people fought for the right for me to have that. And so it's our role in life to find ways of contributing to the world for ourselves and for others. So I just think, we have the opportunity to really create something incredible, and that we should find ways of really helping do that through our work, and be willing to experiment and challenge ourselves and other people around us in positively critical, reflective, and provocative ways.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Cracks of Light podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please help me make the Cracks of Light bigger and brighter in this world by sharing this with your network. Together, we can build a world where people, planet, and profit collectively thrive. And if you have input to the Cracks of Light Leadership Manifesto, please go to my website, www.laura-storm.com. I would love to hear from you. Take care.